interviewed two developers of the Wii game We Wish You a Merry Christmas. The first one being Andy Boggs, the lead engineer and an additional designer. He is the first name that you see in the credits of the game. I did a written Q&A with Andy, meaning I sent him over questions written via email, and then he wrote back his responses to me. Written interview with Andy, and then the other dev that I interviewed that made this game, Jim Stifelmeyer. I did a Zoom call, a video interview with Jim, and you will see that in just a minute. So, here's how this segment is structured. I have a paper right here with all of Andy's written answers. I will read the question that I asked to Andy, and then read Andy's answer. I asked Jim all of these same questions. So, I'm gonna read the question, how did the game come about? Read Andy's answer, and then right after that, I'll put Jim answering the same question via Zoom call. So you kind of get both answers in the same segment. You get both of their responses, one after the other. And of course, I will have gameplay on the screen because I know a lot of people are not familiar with this game, so if you can see the gameplay on the screen and then see what they're talking about, it'll make a lot of sense. It's a whole festive themed segment, you'll enjoy it. So, with that said, let us begin with the interview of this game. I'm so happy that I was able to do this, so let's begin. I asked both of them, could you tell me about how you got involved with this game? Maybe who had the idea and how it came about? Anything you know from its pre-production? Andy said, sure, I had just been hired at Panic Button and they were looking for an idea for a new game to pitch to a publisher. My memory isn't perfect as to who had the idea, but I think the inspiration came from those fireplace videos that people would put on TV around the holidays if they didn't have their own. We thought, why not expand on that and turn it into a game? Given that the Wii was still doing really well pulling in non-gamers and families, it seemed like a strong idea. We shopped it around to a few smaller publishers, and Destineer, who was the publisher for the game, wound up biting on it. A lot of the pre-production was brainstorming all the things that you could do and how they would work with the Wiimote. I think the total development time on the game was 6 to 8 months from concept to completion, which even for a small title was insane to me at the time. I had come from a big AAA studio working on a project with 100 plus people, so being in our one-room studio with our tiny team and coming up with things and then getting them in-game and playable within a week or so was really refreshing. Love to hear it, and then I asked Jim the same question. Here's his pre-production stories, how the game came about, the earliest things that he can recall from this game.
It was like the golden era of Wii games where you could make something really quick, get it out, and then try to make some money. We had just started a small startup called Panic Button, still in business today. They do a lot of really high-end ports, and they do some really cool tools for Nintendo as well. And we're just like a starving group of designers and artists, and programmers, and we're like, we'll take any gig we can get. And I think we had proposed a couple games. One of them was based on a Christmas thing, and the whole idea is Christmas rolls around and you pull out all of your ornaments, you pull out your decorations, you get nostalgic, and that game was meant to come out and be unpacked and played with your family for the 30 days of December, and then just put away, and then a year later you kind of bring it out. And the Wii was the perfect hardware for it too, right? 4-player co-op. Nintendo's such a family-friendly, hardware. It all just kind of worked. Basically, it was the credits. I think everybody that was remotely involved or put in the credits, but really it's a story of 3 people. It was Andy. I think you had talked to him previously as the lead engineer, myself as a designer, and Aaron Schmischny as the artist. And then, we had David Bunn and I think Brad Garneau and a couple of people kind of contribute, but and then Michael and Craig were the owners of the company as well, and they kind of kicked in. But really, it was just 3 people code jamming for 3 or 4 months, because Christmas doesn't move, right? So you got to hit that deadline. It was a really weird gig. Basically somebody contacted us and said, hey, you shopped around a couple ideas. We want to do this Christmas thing. It was Destineer, I think. And, they're like, we don't have a lot of money. In fact, I think they went out of business like 6 months later or something. And they're like, how does like 100,000? It's like, no, you can't do it, but maybe 125. And I think we settled on 124. But the interesting thing is they only made like 80,000 copies. And what was really cool is, it became almost like a collector's item for like a couple years after the release. Because it was such short supply, you would see like the aftermarket Wii discs go for like $300-400 on eBay. It was crazy. And I had like I had like a case of 100 of them. And we were in a small little studio in Austin, Texas. Right next door to our studio was like a child psychologist. So all these kids came in and they were, hurt, damaged, troubled. And, she would often bring them over to be like, see a real cool video game developer. I would always make an effort to give them a tour. And I'd always kind of give them like, do you have a Wii? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, here, grab this game. And, I hope that it kind of brightened their lives in the way that I think the design was meant to, And from a pre-production standpoint, the game was we had like 4 months, dude. Like you can't make anything in 4 months and you can't make it in 124. So like, first of all, I'm super proud that we just made it. But the fact that in my opinion, it's not a very novel game. It doesn't have the highest production values, but for what it wanted to be, I think we nailed it 110%. It was nostalgic co-op family thing. So, what we did is we didn't have a lot of time. It's like, well, what do we do for game design? So we basically just ripped off all the popular kind of genres that we're currently working on in the moment. So match 3 is always a big deal. We made a match 3 game. Wii bowling, like that was probably the funnest thing on the Wii, other than Mario or Mario Kart, whatever. Like bowling was like the tennis and bowling, like everybody like, you've got to play the Wii, check it out. And bowling was just like a simple flick, simple input, total fun. And so we just kind of like reskin that for Santa. And one of the questions, like, we're bowling over L's. I was like, can you really do that? To like write in the thing, don't worry, like it just tickles the L's. So the kids,
I love that part.
We try to cover all our bases when we did crazy stuff like that. Aaron Schmishny, the artist, made a version that we didn't release of like when the L's got knocked over and they fell into that abyss, like flames came out.
Oh my gosh. Oh like, my.
We kept it in for a while, and then we had to make sure we take it out because you don't want to leave those in inadvertently, like ruin a childhood or something. So yeah, I mean, like pre-production was really quick. It was we made a list of like 30 games and we whittled it down to like our top 8 or 6 or whatever. And one of the things that I really wanted to do is that we had a system clock, and I wanted to have the games were very basic, and I wanted to keep the family coming back for more. So we did an advent calendar, which kind of unlocked a little thing every day. So it was a reason to keep coming back, keep hanging out with your family. 4-player couch co-op, like the perfect kind of nostalgic Christmas experience. But we wanted to make something for everybody, and there's something charming about a kid writing their first letter to Santa. And the whole idea was we were going to be able to like save that, and the parents would be able to see what the kid wrote.
Oh yeah.
And just decorating Christmas tree, like you probably had a tree that you were decorated, but sometimes you don't have all the different decorations, or maybe you don't have a big tree, or maybe you didn't have a tree at all. So we just try to give you a little bit of that, and it was something fun about like cooperating together to make something artistic rather than try to outscore each other.
I've been loving to hear all the stories about this game. The next question that I asked them was, out of the 6 mini games, Deck the Halls, Present Catch, Santa's Sleigh, Reindeer Games, Hot Chocolate, Candy Cane Lanes, which is your favorite and why? Andy said, it's been a while since I've played them, but I have the fondest memories of working on Santa's Sleigh. I got the initial version of it up and running pretty quickly with some temp art, and I remember it just being fun to play immediately. A lot of times when you work on gameplay, it can be hard to find the fun until it's nearly done. Hot Chocolate was a good example of that. It was hard to see how it would turn out until all the art was in, and the sound effects were there and it was polished. Santa's Sleigh just started out fun, and it was great when the final art started coming in. It just felt better and better every day. Now, I kind of changed the question for Jim. Because we had a video call and I had more time to speak to him, I asked him about 4 of the 6 games individually. Here is where I asked him about the Hot Chocolate game.
The Hot Chocolate thing was literally just a Cooking Mama homage, or ripoff or whatever. But it was skin for Christmas. I think it made a lot of sense. The funny thing about it was our boss, Russell Bird, he's like, the elves have to pat their tummy and just like really love the hot chocolate. So that was his little inspiration. But I think like it was a really fun, accessible game. Like, it's hard. It's actually challenging. Like, I'd come off making Area 51 and Area 51 Black Site, and those are like first person shooters where I'd be in a meeting talking about like how do we pop the enemy's head off and explode it so the blood goes towards the camera, and then the vertebra needs to be a little bit more white so it pops on the screen. And like making those kind of games is relatively easy. Simple is hard. Fun simple is really hard, and trying to make something that works for a broad range of ages at a young age is actually incredibly challenging. So I think we pulled it off with that cooking thing.
Then I asked him about the Present Catch game, which is a game in We Wish You a Merry Christmas where you move this elf to bounce presents into Santa's sack. Here's what he said.
Did you find that hard?
At first a little bit, but now I'm like a master. I know where to put the elves right away. Like, I'm great at it now, but at first a tiny bit.
I sucked at that game. So that was based on Kaboom, actually, an old Atari 2600 game. So, my backstory, I started making video games when I was 16 in California. I worked on like SNES, Genesis, Turbo 16, like the 2D, and then like my first real video game jobs was like the transition into PlayStation 1, the 3D era. So I was really lucky to have a mentor. He was an Atari 2600 programmer. His name was Rob Fullup. He actually did like Night Driver. He did a lot of and then he founded a company called iMagic. So he did like Demon Attack, which is one of my favorite Atari 2600 games of all time. And he knew everybody. Like the Atari 2600 club was really tight. So like legends like David Crane would come and hang out at lunch. So I had all these like amazing Atari 2600 programmers come, and I was like 16. I was just like soaking it all in. And what I really learned was like simplistic, classic play patterns and how fun and engaging you can be when you have like two colors. And I don't know what the resolution of a 2600 was, like 240, 120 or something like that. Like it was blocky. And so I had a great respect for classic 2D play patterns. And so when I was at Crystal Dynamics, when I was making Gex levels, for instance, I would try to take what was fun about two-dimensional play patterns, translate them into 3D. And so when we got to, trying to come up with some games, there was always something really fun about Kaboom and trying to catch something. And so in this case, we added a bounce parameter to it to put it into Santa's sleigh or sack or whatever. And every once in a while, a little bastard elf, I don't know why, drops an ice one. We had to kind of evolve the challenge, and I think we made it a little too hard. That was probably one of the harder games, but it is fun.
I then asked Jim about the Santa Sleigh game, the one that Andy spoke pretty highly of. You fly over houses and drop in presents to each house, depending on how many it wants you to put in there. Here's what he said.
Yeah, so that was an homage to Paperboy, another, I think Atari, or it might have been, I think it was an Atari coin-op. But basically you play a Paperboy like hucking papers. Like they don't even do kids like throwing newspapers anymore. It's like such an archaic construct. But the whole idea was like, that and some of the classic 2D games where you could drop a bomb and try to hit something, and we just wanted to get something that had four players kind of clicking, and it's actually really interesting because there's a timing element which wasn't that hard for kids to master, but then depending on how many players were playing, it got to be a kind of compositional thing where like, hey, the blue present guy, you got to drop one, but the green present guy has to do three, and then the next house might be reversed or something. So you had to work cooperatively, and it kind of got fast and frenetic, and again, it was another great couch co-op moment.
And finally, I asked Jim about the Candy Cane Lanes game, which is pretty much Wii Bowling, but in a Christmas sort of skin, I guess you would say. Here's what he said.
That one was really hard to do. Like, I have to give credit to Nintendo. When they did tennis and they did bowling, they did such an amazing job because the Wii itself was very hard to tune and make games for. Wii Motion Plus got a lot more accuracy, but the classic Wii, it would drift after just a few minutes. So you would have to do things where you would in the middle of the game, in between individual rounds, you would look for little ways to make people manipulate the controller in a certain way that would recalibrate it. But you had to like, Nintendo would be like, hold the controller and recalibrate it. But we wanted to try to hide it in some of the gameplay. So I thought we pulled that off really, really well. And other than that, yeah, it was just when you're making a first person shooter and and Halo has sold 100 million copies, you probably don't want to come up with a control scheme that significantly deviates from there, because you want to tap into the muscle memory of the 100 million people playing Halo. So you adopt the kind of classic input, and then you put your spin on it. Well, that's what we did with bowling and some of these other games where you tap into the joy and the muscle memory of these forebearer games that people loved, and you build on it. And in this case, it was really easy to build on it because we just put a Christmas wrapper around it. And it definitely wasn't like my finest moment in innovative new gameplay. Like all of these are pretty much homages, but putting them all together and doing the unlock scheme and doing things like decorating Christmas tree and stupid things like being able to like change the color of the fireplace flame, just dumb stuff like that, but it all reinforces the tonality of like a Merry Christmas. I think that's where we succeeded if we didn't do it in novel gameplay.
We move on from the minigames. I then asked Andy and Jim. I read the credits, and there were a lot of repeating last names, seemingly family members of the dev team. Was this game by chance a family and friends effort? Andy said, totally. We were such a small team with no dedicated QA testers. We had to rely on our friends and family to help us. A lot of people's kids were coming in as well, and they gave invaluable feedback, especially since so much of the team were more mainstream gamers. We were just taking wild guesses about what kids would find fun when we were building the game. Would a certain game be too hard or too easy? Or with some of the more finicky Wiimote-based activities? We were worried that the controls wouldn't be intuitive, or maybe a kid wouldn't think to shake the remote the way I would think to when I programmed it. So yeah, a lot of family had a hand in there. Jim said this.
For sure, like that's how we validated the concept. And I was really lucky that I think my daughter was 7 at the time and my son was probably 11. So they're like the perfect age to test it. It was kind of cool, like having been a creative director in the video games, I was always like the cool dad that always had like, we had the PlayStation 2 before it was launched, PlayStation 3 before it was launched, and like check this out. It was probably challenging for them because I kind of feel like one of those cigarette manufacturers, like kids don't smoke. It's like we were very careful with media with our kids. And they couldn't have a lot of video game time. They actually had to read and they had to make things with Legos. Like really wanted to keep the creativity and all of that in there. And then the reward was video games, and it was just Nintendo, because you knew it was safe, you knew it was fun, you knew it was imaginative. And this is just like I love Nintendo for like raising your family well, Yeah, for sure. So, they did a lot of QA. I'm sure we violated some child labor laws or something like that. In fact, all of my games, I think I snuck in Easter eggs with my kids, when they were born. So my son was born when I think I made Gex 2. And there's like some secret hidden levels, and actually somebody found them, which is super crazy. Like I cannot believe in the space level you had to jump off the void and land on an invisible platform and go left, right, and then it unlocked and then it unhid all the secret geometry. And then there was my son, and you could like tail whap it and explode, and you got a 1-up and it teleported you back. And so in every game, I put my kids, like their initials, their text, like a texture of their, their baby shots or whatever. And, I really wanted to, like, being a young father and making video games, you're away from your family. Like I'm sure you work crazy hours from, like say 10 a.m. to like midnight, 6 days a week. And so, my family would have to come and have picnics with me on weekends to like remember what dad looked like. So it was just kind of a way to kind of like, if I could bring them in, at least during the completion process, and help them QA it. It was great because you could watch them play it and you don't say anything. You just watch them play and you make your notes and then you adjust the difficulty. So yeah, it was a family thing, and it really helped the quality of difficulty be right for that age group.
I then asked, what was the most stressful part of creating We Wish You a Merry Christmas? Andy said, For me, it was the fact that I hadn't shipped a Wii game before and being worried about the deadline. The game only worked if we got it out in time for Christmas, so keeping it on schedule was critical. Luckily, it came together pretty smoothly. In fact, I think we actually wound up finishing it and submitting it early, which is another thing that has never happened to me since on another project. Jim said something similar.
The most stressful part probably was more about the business aspect. Like, we had to laser focus. We didn't have a lot of money. So, we need to make stickers. Well, who's going to make stickers? How much of those cost? So we were there was like 4 or 5 of us, and we were a video game studio. And if we screw this up, we don't eat. So, it was very stressful and very challenging to make a game on a shoestring budget. And worse, it had to be done at a certain time because we had to ship. Back in the day when you had to make discs, it took a while. You had to make the gold master disc. You ship it off to Nintendo. They do a lot check, which basically their QA process, and they make sure that you don't violate any of their core programming requirements, but also any of their standards. That takes like a month or so, and then it takes a month to replicate the discs and to get them out to Best Buy or whatever was selling things back then. And so we couldn't screw up. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of people, but we had a super, we were super passionate about making something for our families. Like, all of us, I think, have had kids or were just new parents. So it was like one of those things where it's like, we're doing something that's bigger than us. And, it's great that you reached out because it makes you feel like you didn't waste your time on it. But I'll tell you, I got letters, kids wrote in saying this game is really cool. It really made me feel happy. One of the kids lost their dad.
My next question was a bit of a personal question that I had, not so much for the good of the group, but an Easter egg in the game that I had to get to the bottom of. I asked, to roll the credits in the game, you must click on what appears to be a family photo. I've wondered for many years what the photo is. If I can ask, whose is it? Someone on the team maybe? And how did it get into the game? Andy said, good eye. I actually have no idea who that photo is of. It's very possible it could have been one of the team's kids, or just some random photo we found. So it seems like no one knows the answer. Guess what? Jim knew the answer.
Yeah, that is a family photo of us, right?
Yours?
Yeah, we just kind of messed it up or whatever because we wanted. Yeah, no, it definitely was a little secret thing. It was weird. That interface, it's like a little, I don't know, Midwestern 1950s home. Maybe, I don't know what the art direction was, but it was kind of crazy. It had a little antique radio to listen to the karaoke, Christmas Carol kind of stuff. It was a fun thing.
My next question was specific to Andy's written Q&A, but Jim also said something that makes sense to put in here, so I'll have his response in here too. I asked Andy specifically, I noticed in the hot chocolate game, the milk is branded as Boggs Milk. As you'll know, Andy's last name is Boggs Milk. As a neat Easter egg, are there any other Easter eggs like that you can think of? Andy said, that's funny, I forgot about that. That was likely something Aaron, our tech artist, did just to annoy me. I'm sure a few others made their way in there, but I can't recall specifics. And here's what Jim said about extra Easter eggs in games.
There probably are. There's one art thing that I know Aaron did, but I'll let you talk to him and see if he remembers how to activate it. Honestly, it's been such a gosh darn long time. I had to I just recently got interviewed for one of my Gex things, and they were talking about, hey, what was the meaning of these things? It's like, oh, that was my wife's initials or whatever, and I had totally forgotten I'd done that. We made so many games so quickly that you really lost count. I'm sure there are plenty in there, but I'd probably have to go talk to Aaron. He's over at Crystal Dynamics right now. He's still based in Austin too. So, Andy, Aaron, and I are still kind of local to Austin.
And my final question to both of them was, how did you become a game developer? And do you have any advice for game developers? Andy first said, I wanted to be a game dev since I was a kid. And by the time I got out of high school, there were actual college programs for it. I wound up going to Full Sail and got my bachelor's degree. I made some great friends there, and we all migrated to Austin, which was becoming one of the bigger game dev areas outside of the West Coast. I eventually got a job at Midway Austin with a lot of my friends where I got into engine programming, After Midway imploded, I had heard of these amazing programmers, D. Michael Traub and Craig Galley, who started their own studio, and I went to interview with Panic Button. I think I was their first hire that wasn't one of the studio founders. It was tough and we had to be scrappy for a few years, but eventually, we wound up growing to 50 plus people, worked on some amazing games, and I became a co-owner of the company and was promoted to technical director. I wound up working there for 14 years and it all started with this silly little Christmas game. My advice for developers would be to constantly be learning new things and prioritize finding the right team. If you surround yourself with people you enjoy working with and have leaders that value you and have your back, you can have a fulfilling career working on just about anything. I love the advice there, and thank you Andy so much for your written Q&A. Here's Jim's story of how he became a developer and his advice for any new developers.
Oh, I get that all the time. So first of all, the industry's totally changed. I lucked into it. I think I was working at the library, and I was like a page, like I'd put the books back when people check them out. And my mom's like, you're really bored. You should like go find a new job. So, I couldn't drive yet. She took me to like the job agency or whatever. And there were, I was interested in computers. I had grown up playing, Atari and ColecoVision. And then I kind of graduated to Apple IIe and Apple IIgs and kind of went the computer video game side rather than the console. And there was so I was interested in computers. I actually had a 300 baud modem, like old school, like crazy, internet. I was like 12 at the time or something. And, always been interested in computers. And there was a job board and there was like 2 jobs under the computer section. One was like refill laser toner cartridges, which sounds like one of the world's worst jobs ever. And the next one was like, come make video games. So that's like a pretty easy decision there. So I went and interviewed, and it was with Rob, the 2600 game programmer. And, he was interviewing me, and, he's a really interesting guy. He plays in the World Series of Poker. He really believes in the intrinsic value of luck, for instance. And, I had the best interview of my entire life. It was my first interview. And he's just like, what kind of, games do you play? And I was saying, I really love Atari 2600, and he's like, oh yeah, what kind of games did you play? And I mentioned like 2 of his games. And I said, one of my favorite though is this shooter called Demon Attack. And he's like, turn around behind you. And I look, and there's like the Demon Attack poster. I had no idea. Who he was. Because you didn't have the internet to do like the research of who you're interviewing with, right? And so he's like, well, all right, what are you doing these days? I'm like, oh, I'm on this thing called Apple Link Personal Edition, which became AOL. So like, it was like one of the very first like online kind of like hubs and worlds. And they're doing this poker game called Rabbit Jack's Casino. And I'm QAing it for free, but I get to go online and play poker with adults. So I thought I was like the coolest kid ever, right? And he's like, what's your handle? And I said, well, whatever. It's like the Ranger 42 or something like that. And he looks on a piece of paper and he's like, yeah, I see your bug reports. They were making Rabbit Jack's a casino. I had no idea. So it was like one score after another. And, after we had a good interview, he's like, all right, well, we'll let you know. And I'm walking out into the lobby to leave. And he has an old antique slot machine. And it took nickels. Like, what slot machine takes nickels? I had a nickel in my pocket, and I said, "Hey, I have a nickel in my pocket. Do you mind if I, try?" Because it was an old machine. He's like, "No, go ahead." So I put it in, and I did it. Ding, ding, ding! Jackpot! And all
no way.
Yeah, it was crazy. And he's like, "You're hired." So that was my like entry into video games. So I started making stuff for Compact Disc Interactive. We worked on a thing called the Edge 16, which is like the very first connected experience before Catapult, before any of the Xbox Live. It was an AT&T modem. It was a 14K modem that had voice over data. So you would talk into a headset and over a modem while you were playing. And we had a side-scrolling fighter, one on a Super Nintendo, and then one on a Genesis. And we actually showed off it at E3, or sorry, it was CES at the time. So yeah, I really started doing that. We were making a game there called Velocity. It was for the PlayStation 1, and the programmers couldn't quite get the frame rate to work properly. But I had made like 100 levels for this game. I'd worked on it for like 2 years, and then it got canceled. And I was like, maybe I should make video games. Maybe I should go back to. Dropped out of college, to continue making video games. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should just give up. But Crystal Dynamics was making Gex on the 3D multiplayer and for the PlayStation 1. And I just like lived by them. So I just walked in and said, hey, I'm a video game designer. I have like this tape of like 10 minutes of my gameplay. And so they brought a producer over. We watched the tape that I had of like 10 minutes of like very rudimentary three-dimensional gameplay for the PlayStation 1. It ran at like 20 frames a second, but you could see like the fun there. I think I walked out with a job that day. And so I really just kind of blundered into video games. Now, what I've done since then is worked really, really hard to enable people to have a shot at, coming in the industry. So mostly through like two ways. The first way is whenever I was a designer, I would work really closely with the QA staff. Most designers don't really pay that much attention to QA. They're kind of off in the other side of the building, and they don't really interact too well. But I was with them like every day, watching them playing my levels. I would have them come over as I was like debugging my levels and really kind of talking them through like, well, here's where I'm getting around this trigger. The camera's breaking because I didn't hit the trigger. And then when I walk out the room this way, it flips the camera, and I would notice a couple QA people would start getting what I was saying and what I was doing. And I'm like, hey, do you want to make a level with me? And so I would stay late, or weekends or late at night. And I would say probably like 6 QA people, became designers because I did that. And then back in my Midway days when I was working on, Midway, Inevitable got acquired by Midway. So I was Area 51, and then Area 51 Black Site was Midway Austin. We had to get like 30 or 40 designers. And, it's really hard to hire good designers. So one of the things we did is we talked to, Guildhall up at SMU, went to FIA with Florida Entertainment. We didn't go to DigiPen for some reason. I don't know why, but we went to Full Sail, and Full Sail is this video game university. Essentially, they also do audio, and we basically had a pipeline where we just like interviewed every like 3 months and brought people on. We probably hired 10 to 12 kids out of Full Sail, and it's their first jobs. Like, it's so hard to get in the industry. Every one of them that we hired, because we had a really rigorous hiring process, every one of them is like a senior designer or a creative director in their own right today. So it's really kind of a cool success story. My advice for people that want to get into video games now is like, obviously play a ton of games so that you have the ability to have, the diction and the vocabulary to talk about, play patterns and what makes sense. I think Naughty Dog did it well in that they kind of, and Valve to a certain extent, they only hire hybrids. There wasn't just a designer. There wasn't just a programmer. There was an artist designer. There was a programmer artist. So I think one thing you need to do is get that design, that intrinsic understanding of design, playing games, reading up deconstruction of games. There's programs. There wasn't really programs for video games in universities when I was coming up. Now you can. I think that's a valid way to go through it. Personally, just go find a game that you can mod, go make your own levels, and see what you can find out about yourself. And then once you feel like you're getting good enough, find a team out there. It's super easy. Go on someone's Discord. It's a bunch of kids that are trying to put a game together. Volunteer your time. If you're a programmer, contribute to somebody's, Git repository. If you're an artist, go make some cool textures or make some cool animations, and start working together. It's never been easier to make a game. Get out there and do it. And that's like the only way to really force yourself to grow. And then there's a lot of luck. But once you make a couple, games on the side as passion projects, then when you do get your shot, you can say, look, I'm educated. I've played all these games. I can talk the talk, and then look at what I've done. Your creative side projects are like your entree into the job. So I would recommend people become interesting hybrids. Don't just be a designer. Don't just be an artist. Be a designer artist or be a designer programmer. And the second thing is like work together to go make some community games, learn from that, and then keep doing it. And it's really hard to get in the industry, and it's really hard right now. The industry is just just like all my friends, like I'm on LinkedIn like every day, and I'm just seeing one amazing person after another losing their job because the industry is just going through such a, crazy experience right now.
And that's pretty much everything, but I did ask Jim one question that I forgot to ask Andy. And that question was, whenever someone brings up the game We Wish You a Merry Christmas, everyone says to me, man, they really missed the opportunity to name it Wii, W-I-I, like Nintendo Wii. We wish you a Merry Christmas. I asked Jim if that was ever a thought, if that was ever in play, and guess what? It was.
Yeah, I mean, that was what it was originally titled. That's what I sold it as. I'm like, it's perfect. It's We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Nintendo's like, you cannot use the word thing. Yeah, so Nintendo killed that like immediately. Yeah, it's like it was very obvious. I wish Nintendo would bring it back. I wish they would take the concept. I wish they would name it whatever. And like it's too good of a concept to. You should have this every year, and you should make new fans every year. All these kids should have this amazing child experience that you had every year. It'd be simple to do. I don't know why Nintendo doesn't do it.
And so that is my interview with Andy Boggs, the lead engineer, and Jim Stiefelemeyer, the lead designer and the producer. Thank you so much to both of them. If you're watching, hello! Thank you so much for your time with this interview. And that's just something I was so glad to be able to do, because I've been playing this game for years on end. Years on end. Every single December, and even earlier, in like November, I would pull the game out, put it in the Wii, and I'll start playing. And it's just so cool to know the roots of the game and what the ideas were, and to talk to the actual dev team years later, because this game came out in 2009, I believe. 15 years later, we're talking to them. So it's cool stuff. That is the interview. I hope that anybody who is a fan of this game got some what do you call it? Got some pleasure, got some joy out of seeing me interview these guys. They're awesome, and I hope this was a nice little segment for the holiday season. I think it was.